Scorpio lunar eclipse, 5th/May 6, 2023. Financial rebalancing begins 6-month forecast for all signs. Introduction. Hi, I am Batool astrologer. Today I'm going to share with you about the Scorpio lunar eclipse or flower moon, which occurs across the 5th and 6th of May at 14 degrees and 58 minutes in the sign of Scorpio, but it's going to be reflecting back across the heavens, not just to the Sun but also Uranus, which is at 18 degrees in Taurus. So Uranus was really important to the last lunar eclipse occurred, which is the mirror image of this one, and that was on the 8th of November in the sign of Taurus, and eclipses do work in pairs. Now that particular eclipse did trigger the financial crisis that we've already been going through, and I want to share with you why that was, how that feeds in and informs this event, why that was so difficult, why this does hold some possibilities for improvements, but I'm also going to outline each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can relate to for the next 6 months. The period of impact of this eclipse, from the point of view of the Sun or the Ascendant, the choice is yours. If you're a returning visitor to my channel, it's great to have you with me once more. If you're new here, I'd be honored if you would subscribe. I really would appreciate your support. Now I mentioned that there is a reflection between last November's What to Expect eclipse and this one, 2022 lunar eclipse in Taurus, have a financial crisis, and the reason for that is that the lunar eclipse, which occurred on the 8th of November, not only was in a conjunction with the restless and disruptive energies of Uranus, the Sun and the Moon positions were in a square with Saturn. Saturn's the planet of structure, but of course this is the planet of restrictions. When this event occurred, at universal time, Saturn was in house 2, everyday money, whereas the Moon was in house 4, properties, family, finances, our personal situation, and the Sun right at the top of the chart at that time in house 10, that can be more to do with buildings. Now I'm just briefly going to share with you this event, which sees the ascendant at 25 degrees and 54 minutes in Libra, but it is squaring up to Pluto by a roundabout just under 4 degrees. So although they're both in air signs, because Pluto's so early in Aquarius and Libra so late, we have a square, and implicitous Pluto's just on that 3rd, 4th house cusp. So I think the impact still in terms of our personal costs. Heating and lighting our properties, paying for rental or mortgage payments has been much more strenuous for a lot of people, but you can see on this event that there's a whole plethora of influences in house 7, which is all how we relate but also how we set our boundaries. But there's Uranus again, very influential in this event alongside the Sun, so we can see some disruptions still, but I feel that because Mars is forging a very positive angle to Uranus, this is pushing us to keep being imaginative about how we can manage our household finances, however tough it is. Also, we can see that we do have a very positive link between the North Node and also the retreat in Mercury in Taurus, which is the sign of everyday money, and they are in a positive link to Saturn in house 4. I think what we're going to see is the height of the cost of living crisis. We may see interest rates edge up a little bit more yet just to try to dampen down inflation, but of course, there has been a lot of outspoken disputes around pay, particularly with public workers. House 11, which is where Saturn falls when the lunar eclipse of last November occurred, and of course it's where Pluto is now. So Pluto is still just in a square with the North Node, which is very much the collective will, so it's not necessarily just all going to settle down. There's going to be still a lot of strident opinion. We've seen it in France with the age of retirement reforms. We've obviously seen a lot of different opinions in the United States, rather polarized opinions at times, and in the United Kingdom, there's a lot of conflicts around public public workers, people who work in organizations that support the public, and that is not necessarily going to come to a close straight away, but I feel in the next 6 months is potentially going to be a little bit more tranquil. Now, in terms of viewing this particular lunar eclipse as a collective event that we can all relate, so of course Taurus is the sign of everyday money and Scorpio is the sign of longer term and shared finance, and therefore houses 2 and 8. So that's in terms of the collective. But we do have Mars in house 4, which is forging that very constructive link, a bit broader to the Sun but much closer to Uranus. So we are being pushed to keep trying to flex, readjust, find new economies, however tough it is. Now, in terms of where this particular lunar eclipse will occur, below you will see a list of them, but on where in the world? It's on the 5th in every major city of the world apart from Sydney, and that is the 6th. So in terms of how this will influence the next 6 months for each of the 12 zodiac signs, please stay with me as I go through them, from Aries through to Pisces. Aries, this event really does give you food for thought around balancing the ins and the outcomes in your situation. Uranus could throw up some costs that are not expected, but I don't want you to view this event in a fearful way, because what I would say to you is that this still gives you a lot of opportunity to think about how you can bring new ideas and fresh approaches, perhaps working from home, turning a part-time hobby into something that could give you some kind of income stream, reducing your costs in terms of where you live. Perhaps by downsizing in some kind of way or looking to economize even more. Because it's very much about innovation. It's not just about disruption, so we can tease out new ways of approaching things for sure, but the moon in the 8th house of course can be a bit secretive in Scorpio, so if you are dealing with somebody that you're not quite so sure about what their motives are, I think it will be important to try to understand what those might be. So even if someone turns out to be a really solid citizen in your world, I don't think it's such a bad thing, particularly if you're considering any kind of new job where packages being proposed, or it is something you're thinking of putting money into. Really research, because that Scorpio moon could be a bit secretive for you. But of course major ruler is influenced brilliantly by Uranus, so changes around where you live. Whether it is having a decluttering session and the selling off items you no longer want. Perhaps it is turning what up to now has been a hobby into something that can give you some kind of extra return, or is it just about how you feel about yourself? The 2nd house of where the Sun and Uranus is very much about self-worth. Now Neptune, the planet of dreams, along with Saturn are tucked up in your 12th house, which can be a little bit draining, and Venus is in house 3, so that's great for chit-chat, being flirty, but I feel that Venus, because it governs the sign of Taurus, can impact on your finances. So if someone was feeding you information and you were unsure of its reliability, then do listen to your 6th sense, around a personal situation, even around a relationship. Someone could, not necessarily will, could turn out to be a little bit unreliable. Perhaps even all the way to dishonest, that the worst extreme over the next 6 months, but this is all down to you and the decisions you make. After all, you still have a lovely link between Jupiter, the planets of fortune, and Neptune, its co-ruler of Pisces, a semi-sack style. So I feel anything you're working on as an individual that's a bit fresh and different could turn out to be surprisingly successful to you. Taurus, now for you, of course this is your sign. So the moon's occurring in your 7th house of relating, so what's the story, morning glory? Well, I feel that someone may feel that the time and energy you've been investing in doing something for you over recent months, perhaps even the last few years, there could be an element of jealousy. You know that you've always been seen as the steady citizen, the person who keeps it all together. It's very reliable, very jolly and very patient towel. Rounds, but I feel that what Uranus has done is provoked you really and all that gathering of energy in Pluto to be much more avant-garde in your approach. And if you've really got into that, at this precise point, you're not going to necessarily want to stop trying to do things differently, but also trying to share the authentic persona that you've been evolving. So if someone close to you is feeling a bit pushed out or a bit judgmental of the way that you're heading, they decide that what you're doing is so important to you that you're going to stick with it, even if it does threaten certain relationships. But just be cautious, because Venus, your ruler, is in house 2, which rules everyday money, and it is in a very blurry link to Neptune. So any advice that you're getting, financial advice, if someone's being a little bit too optimistic about what your options are, or perhaps using their personal charm and persuasion in some way to influence some of what you're doing, you should be careful, because nurturing square Venus is a real trickster, and because Venus is in house 2 for you personally, that's about everyday money, and of course, in general, this is an event very much to do with resources. Having said that, with Uranus in your sign in that sextile to Mars, that is giving you encouragement to keep the faith with what you're trying. That's fresh, different and bold, and probably very exciting too. So you've got an option, of course, to trim back, bring in others, be more relatable to them or one person in particular, but the opportunity to keep going and trying this rather edgy approach that you've been embracing is certainly something that can continue to bring a lot of excitement and potential rewards. Gemini. Now Gemini, for you the energy of the eclipse itself is in the part of your situation to do with everyday structures, but of course the sign of Scorpio can be quite secretive. So something about your health, your physical health, could become more obvious to you over the next 6 months, but it may be something you learn for yourself, becoming more aware of a particular approach to, say, hygiene, nutrition, exercise. So there can be some revelations there, not in a sinister way, necessarily, but the Sun and Uranus are in house 12, very much the psychological play, and if you are resisting that side of your nature, your shadow side, for your nervous system could continue to be a little bit on edge, but with Venus in your sign, you're certainly having a sense of your allure, and someone through your work could be only too happy to try to flatter you, but be very cautious, because the 6th 12th house lunar eclipse could see some opposition mounting to you, but not necessarily in an open way. So if you're someone who's very much needing the cooperation and collaboration of your colleagues, I really would say, be conscious of office or workplace politics, because you know that could be something that could be a snag, but also be conscious of not adding to any of that, because within us, in your sign, you may be feeling very good about yourself, but also it's important to understand that some people may have some insights of how they can manipulate you, and I just feel natural Venus is a really tricky link, and a 12th house location of the Sun on a 6th house lunar eclipse just says, perceive of a little bit of care when it comes to your relationships, in your professional situation. Cancer. This lunar eclipse occurs in house 5 view, very much about representing your talents, your flair and artistry, but also having fun, and with Uranus so close to the Sun in your 11th house of where you connect to others and Mars in your sign, I feel that this can be in a very exciting time for you. What's not to like? Well, it's just that Venus in your 12th house is linking with Neptune in house 9. So your sensitivity around relationships can continue to be strong, and really knowing that you can rely upon people is something that's going to bring you a lot of reassurance, and Uranus is a very unpredictable influence, so there could be some exciting people you get to know, but they don't necessarily hang around in your life. Doesn't mean to say You don't want to enjoy that connection because they could be very uplifting but if you are wanting something that's deeper and longer lasting around relationships, in general, I think what this next 6 months points towards is just lots of interactions, lots of meetings, lots of sparkle. It won't be dull, but I feel that Neptune in the 9th house can amplify your thing. Let's give you a real taste for travel. Go in on any kind of excursion or venture or holiday. It's just that Venus in the 12th house is making you feel very tender about people's sincerity around relationships. Leo, well, the position of the Scorpio lunar eclipse is in house 4 for you, very much about where you live, how you live there and who with, but its opposite Uranus is in house 10 and the sun, and that's the physical structure, so there could be some family stuff that's going to go on over the next 6 months. Maybe you're going to move home, that wouldn't be a surprise, or certainly make some improvements to where you're living, but Mars is in your 12th house, actually forging a very strong link to Uranus in your sector of ambitions. I think when it comes to your work, your role in life, how it feels is going to be very important, so don't ignore your feelings. But Venus in house 11 is very sociable, but it is in a complex angle to Neptune. There is going to be someone in your social circle that you're going to find very hard to not get to know better. It's possible, but just be conscious that with Pluto at this present time, therefore when this event occurs in your 7th house, the depth of your relationship experiences are definitely going to be that much more intense over this next half year. Virgo, the Scorpio for you is house 3, which is, everyday interactions, quite quick, fluid, not necessarily to do with deep reflection, and of course the moon in Scorpio is much deeper, so it's possible that when it comes to some siblings or some people immediately around you, in your neighborhood, there may be some intense exchanges over the next 6 months, but then again with the Sun and Uranus in house 9, that's very much about your desire to open up your world. If there's someone close to you wants to resist that and keep your world very much as it is now, I feel that could be a rub. And of course Mars, the planet of passion, is in house 11 for you personally, very much about the collective, so I feel that you're going to need a lot of extra stimulation over the next half year. And if that's something that in some ways you feel a bit reserved to go for, well, you could make this energy work by doing a lot of research or some studies, or getting yourself better informed about something, because the 3rd and 9th houses are very much about information. But obviously that Scorpio energy is deep, so I feel that you're going to be expressing yourself with conviction over this next 6 months, but possibly encountering some new people who bring an extra dimension to your existence. Libra, for you the moon is in house 2, that's everyday money. Scorpio can see some revelations that you're not expecting. Uranus in house 8. Maybe there's going to be some opportunities. House A can be about business, it can be about insurances, it can be about legacies. Uranus doesn't always have to be bad, but there could be some surprises, and of course with Mars in such a potent part of your situation linking brilliantly to Uranus, this can be your chance to be more assertive to improve your financial situation. What's not to lie? Well, it's just that your rule of Venus is challenged by Neptune, so I feel that 6-9 house energy for you is: don't squander your resources by being too generous and too kindly to those who are perhaps not as fortunate as you. And if you do any voluntary work or you make donations and you can afford the time and the contribution, absolutely fine. But in the more personal context, if someone is sort of like playing the victim a little bit in order to get your financial support, proceed with a great caution. Scorpio, for you, obviously you're not someone who necessarily shows your hand of cards very openly. you tend to be a little bit cautious, but I feel if there is a relationship which you're not enjoying, you may need to finally confront that over this next half year. With Mars, your traditional ruler in House 9, that can be about escape. It's over to you, and you might not be in a relationship and crave that you might be in one. So Uranus could bring someone in a very fast way that you're not expecting, that really makes your pulse race, but we have to be mindful that your modern rule of Pluto is in that awkward angle with the North Node, so whatever you decide to do about relationships, it's going to transform you at an emotional level. And with Saturn in House 5, Saturn can be where we feel the limitation, that is the sector of romance. So even if someone seems like they're very lurid, fun, exciting, is it really someone you could have a longer-term alliance with? That's all that Saturn is asking you to do in its relationship with the North Node and Mercury. So in other words, take things through with care. Sagittarius, the eclipse for you is in House 12. Now that can be to do with secrets, it can be to do with the people that we're not aware of that have some kind of opposition to us, but there can, therefore be a revelation, but also it can, I feel, be to do particularly with Saturn in your 4th house of everyday emotions, be asking you to become much more conscious of what makes you tick, because your natural brilliance, optimism, positivity, and uplift that you bring to situations is a wonderful gift, but not if you're kicking the can down the roads on some awkward parts of your history or experiences, which do need to be processed. So this eclipse is saying, do let things filter through, really important, but of course, your ruler Jupiter is in a gorgeous alliance with the parts of fortune in your 5th house, very joyful, and the 6th house is also about work, so maybe you need to listen to your instincts. The lunar eclipse in Scorpio to guide your moves in terms of employment, but also your life, organization, so get them a better balance, so your existence is a bit more holistic, not just in the material plane, not just in the emotional spectrum, getting that midpoint between the two, and using your positivity, your flair, and your creativity to find a role that really gives you a sense of satisfaction. But if you do work in an environment where you don't trust people and you feel there is a lot of backlights in, I really feel that you need to address this and make a change over the next 6 months. Capricorn, for you, the position of the eclipse is in House 11, the collective, your friends. The moon is very much to do with how we relate. The 11th house for friends can be a bit more detached, but of course the Sun and Uranus in House 5 is what you need. So if there are some friendships or a friendship that are limiting you in some kind of way, with Uranus in the mix, you may decide to push back, be more radical. Also, Mars on your 7th house can set you in your boundaries much more firmly, whether you meet someone new or in an existing situation. But if you are in the mood to be a little bit more speculative of resources, Venus squaring with Neptune just suggests you really need to get all the information nailed down in your inevitable way. You wouldn't risk doing something in a more impulsive and quick way, Sun and Uranus, without using the deep dive energies of Scorpio to really understand what the potential outcomes could be, good or bad. Just get very informed before making any decisions around longer-term money or investments. Aquarius, now for you, the moon being in the sign of Scorpio, is the part of your situation to do with the way you connect to the wider world. The Scorpio is quite a shy sign. If you're someone who does find it at times a bit challenging to talk to people in positions of seniority or authority, and the natural rebel in you kind of makes you think, well, I'm not doing that anyway, why should I play the game? But of course, The Sun and the Uranus in House 4 suggests some kind of change. Where you're living it either means creating more space, getting rid of the space you've got by. In other words, downsizing, or it means moving somewhere else where you feel the environment suits you better. But of course, moving and change can be stressful, and the Moon in the 10th house can make it more difficult to disguise how we feel. Yet Mars in the 6th house is going to strengthen your physicality. You can cope. I just feel that you just need to be aware that with Saturn, your traditional ruler, is in a very positive and supportive link to both the North Node and Mercury. It's just the case that you need to go through the steps in a very methodical way when it comes to any forms, applications, conversations that you need to have. However much that's a bit of a turn-off, just keep going with it. If you're perfectly happy in your existing environment, it could be that maybe people are coming and going, maybe you've got some youngsters going off to college, maybe they've done that. Coming back could be a bit disruptive. You definitely need space. It's always been a very important consideration for Aquarius people as well as Sagittarians to have a degree of space, but also you have a contradiction in your nature. Part of you loves routine, another part of you hates it. How do you deal with that? It just depends on what type of Aquarius you are and the influences in your natal horoscope, but I think you could be feeling quite restless at the present time, and if you don't really have a way of breaking out and making things different, that can build up the restlessness over this next 6 months. Pisces, for you, the lunar eclipse is in House 9, very much about travel, higher truth, philosophy. If you are going somewhere that's different in terms of a holiday vacation or on work, you could find it very stimulating, but also with the Sun-Uranus link in your 3rd house, you may be finding it very hard to sit still, and a great way to burn off any excess nervous energy is to be more active. However, watching your co-ruler squaring up with Venus suggests there could be some confusion around the family, personal emotional matter, romantic matter, perhaps about even where to live. If you are feeling very restless, I think it's possible you could be tempted to make a quick move, when important to embrace the energy of Saturn in your sign, to try to be very sure of any alterations you make are for the right reasons and will have a reasonable prospect of turning out up the way you hope. But in general, I do feel that you're going to be needing to buzz around a lot. If someone is ready into cycling or quick bursts of exercise like walking very quickly between the telegraph pole, you can imagine what goes on, but those kind of quick bursts, or if you're someone who's into circuits, that can be a great way to burn off any excess nervous energy over the next 6 months, as of course as usual swimming, which is very non-impact. Of course, you being a water sign, that could appeal to you, but I feel that if you are feeling that life's a bit repetitive, dull and boring, the key to understand is that this eclipse occurs in a fixed sign. Everything involved, you know, Uranus and the Sun, the North Node and Mercury in retrograde all fixed, and of course the eclipse itself fixed, so that doesn't like change just at a time when you may need or want to change things, so you may have to push yourself a little bit to break out of the inertia, which I think can affect Pisces people, where you just think about things go around and then can't quite find the spark to make a change. So that is something that you may need to grapple with over the next 6 months. It's been so lovely spending time with you again. Watch more. Thank you so much for joining me. I would be honored if you would be kind enough to subscribe. Take care for now and all the best. Thank you.